Okay, we're gonna do a famous looking Christmas tree here with an ornament hanging off of it. So first off, we want to start by outlining our cookie. And one thing I learned about rectangles, especially, or like square cookies, is sometimes your edges are not super straight. If they're really misshapen, you can always take a microplane or like a grater, those thin ones, and you can shave off the edges a little bit. But another trick I've learned is make sure that you just do a straight line. Sometimes I like to follow the edge of my cookie, but for rectangles or squares like this, I try to just do a straight line, even though my cookie may not be as straight, because when your eye looks at the final cookie, you'll see the icing, and if it's all straight, it looks much better. So you can see the line on the bottom is not quite at the edge of the cookie, but my line is quite straight. And if you follow the cookie line, it might make it a little bit more wavy. So that's kind of a tip I learned, just with those type of shapes, to make it nice and clean looking. Focus on your lines more than getting right on the edge of the cookie. Then I go in with my flood, and a lot of people ask me, do I use two consistencies? And yes, I do. Even though the bags look kind of the same in the videos, I always have 2 bags of each color, unless I'm doing really tiny details and I don't need a flood. But I always have my outline and my flood in separate bags. And then people ask me also, how do you know the difference, which one is which? Normally my outline bag is a lot smaller because I need less of it. And if I don't know, if I'm unsure, sometimes I'll just kind of push the bag a little bit and I'll see if it's thicker or thinner, then I know right away which one it is. And with smaller cookies like this or bigger cookies, I adjust my tip size as well. So sometimes if I'm doing really large cookies, I'll cut a bigger tip to flood faster, because when you have a really small tip, it's a lot of pressure and you're kind of piping for a long time. So it kind of gets hard on your hand. So if you find that your hand's getting tired, try cutting that tip a touch bit bigger. And then I'm going to go ahead with my green icing, and we're just going to make the tree part here. So all the branches. So just start by making lines. So we're touching down on the brown and pulling downwards. I'm going to kind of do like a sweeping downward motion. And this type of greenery I kind of like because it always starts off looking not so good, but you keep working at it and keep kind of changing it, and you can make it what you want at the end. So if you're not happy with it right away, be patient, add a few more lines, do a little bit different, like longer and smaller ones, and then you can kind of see it coming together slowly. So you can see I'm pulling out lines a little bit longer here because I realize this is not going to look very good if I continue this way. So I'm going to kind of widen it towards the end here. And I'm just doing a kind of sweeping motion and then almost wiping my tip off the cookie. So some of my tips there, you can see they're spiking upwards, but I'm not too concerned with it really. So what I'm doing is staying really, really, really close to the cookie, because they're kind of short lines, so I don't want to lift it up too much. And then you can see I'm just kind of wiping off the tip, and I let go of the pressure as I do that. So I attach my line to the brown part, and then I will kind of let go of the pressure and sort of wipe the tip off. And you can go up or down, so you can go, some of them I'm going towards the brown kind of stem. Some of them are going from the brown stem out. So whatever feels comfortable for you. If you like piping upwards, downwards, you can kind of switch it up to get different strokes. You see some of my lines break and I just kind of pipe over it. It's going to be covered anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. And sometimes it's easier, for people to pipe a certain way. So it doesn't always have to be the way I do it. Just make sure you feel comfortable with how you are doing it. So I know it doesn't look so great here, but it will look a lot better once we're done. So these are the things, like I said, with greenery that sometimes in the beginning it doesn't quite look good, but you keep adding and it looks much better when it comes together. So here I'm just kind of filling in the gaps. So at first I kind of spaced them out evenly just to give myself an idea of how I want them. And now I'm going to go back and fill in between just to get it a little bushier. And you can see I'm kind of extending some of my lines a little bit further out there. And I cut a small hole here in my bag, but if you're finding that your icing is kind of curling when it's coming out of your bag, I do have that happen, a couple times. But if it's happening every time you're putting pressure on your bag, then your hole has to be slightly bigger. Your icing could be really, really thick too. And so if you put a lot of pressure, that icing might curl out, especially if the hole is small. So with, really sharp scissors, just a sliver bigger on your bag, and test it out a couple times to see if it's good. And it's always best to start very small and just cut a tiny bit bigger, because you can always cut bigger, but you can't really cut smaller. You have to rebag your icing if you end up cutting up too much and your line is too big coming out. But another thing too, if it's curling on me too much, or sometimes what I'll do is I'll push a little bit out of my bag and I'll get that little bit stuck to the cookie, and then I'll pull my icing away, my bag away from that little spot that I've got stuck, and so it kind of straightens out the line. So that's kind of another little tip, that if you secure that icing and pull it nicely, you'll kind of straighten it out if it's curling on you every so often. And it's good practice to do these lines. You kind of push out a little bit of icing, attach the icing, and then, pull it upwards and attach it again kind of to the top part when you want to stop. And whenever you want to stop, you always want to let go of the pressure in the bag and then kind of touch down and cut your line off. So now it's kind of taking shape. It's looking much better. I still have the other side to do here, as I was focusing just on this side to make sure that this cookie is going to turn out the way I had it in my head. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they go in a different direction, but I kind of went through all the stages with this one. I was excited to start it because I was like, oh, this is going to be super easy, and then I kind of saw how it was coming together and it didn't look very good. I was ready to throw in the towel, but I said, no, you know what? I'm going to stick it out and let's see how it turns out. And I'm starting to like it again. And I'm just going to keep going, basically just filling in the lines. And I'm just filling in the lines a little bit just to give it some texture and some thickness. And you can see some of my lines, they're not great. There's peaks sticking up and there's a little bit of curling happening at the edges. Some, little bit edges are a little bit thicker and bulbing out kind of, and it's okay. It doesn't, like I said, have to be perfect, especially this type of cookie. So don't worry about too much and enjoy the process. So here with my red outline consistency, I'm just going to put a few balls on here just to add a little bit of more detail in there. And then of course, we're going to add our famous red ball at the end here that's pulling down that tree tip. And this is again my outline consistency. I'm keeping the piping bag straight up and down, just in one spot, and wiggling a little bit to smooth it out as I go. I'm just kind of moving it around. I don't need to outline and fill this one because it's just better to do it with my scribe to make it nice and even. And I'm just going to have a little bit of gray icing here, outline consistency. And that's the ball kind of hanging onto the tree. And there you have it. I really like how it turned out. What do you guys think? Okay, this one is one of my favorite cutters. You guys probably know that. I've used it so many times and it comes in handy a lot. So here I've spread some of my flood icing onto the cookie, and I'm just going to spread it out with a brush. Now normally you could flood this cookie, outline, you do the flood, wait for it to dry, but this is an alternative you can do if you have a lot of cookies to do, or maybe have people that don't like icing too much. I know sometimes older people don't quite like, layers and layers of icing, so this is always an alternative that you can do, and it's quick, it's easy, it dries fast, so it lets you move on to the next layer quickly. So it's a great idea to do if you're in a time crunch. I almost don't mind if, it's not an even layer and you can kind of see some spots that are more white, some spots that are less white. You see a little bit of a cookie. I don't mind that at all because I'm kind of going for that kind of outdoor Christmassy look. So that's totally okay. And like I said, this dries pretty quickly. If you have a fan and you put this cookie in front of the fan, it won't take too long, maybe, 5 or so minutes. Even maybe less if it's not fully dry, but you can still continue on and do your next step. This is an oak leaf cutter, but I used it for all different types of kind of greenery and florals. So, and here I'm going to do the branch part, and it didn't turn out. It broke my icing. So sometimes when you have an air bubble, or sometimes your icing is a little bit, when you're using thick icing, sometimes it just breaks. So again, I'm going to just try that. Just scraped it off with my scribe, and I'm not really worried if you can see a little bit of brown. It'll be covered eventually, and I don't think anybody will notice it, so I'm not too worried about it. Then I'm just going to add some branches on the side here. Just taking my time slowly, touching down, lifting my bag up just a little bit. The longer the line, the higher I can lift my bag. The shorter the line, the closer I keep it to my cookie. And don't worry too much about the ends if, there's a blob of icing on the end of your line, because it will be covered. And a lot of people ask me about this brown as well. How do I make it or how do I get it? And I usually use Americolor chocolate brown and warm brown together. I find one is too dark, one is too light. So mixed together, it turns out perfect for me. And here we're using the same red outline consistency. So you can see when I'm piping my little balls here, my holly, there's a little peak at the end when I'm done. And I'm also shaking the bag while I'm piping. So the reason I shake the bag a little bit or wiggle it around while I'm piping is because I want it to smooth out while I'm piping. And then all I'm left with just that little peak, and my scribe takes that away. You can, pipe it. You don't have to wiggle it if it's too kind of complicated to do at the same time. You can just pipe in one spot and then smooth it out with your scribe, but I find it gets a lot of the ripples out while I do it this way, and it's less for me to go after with the scribe and smooth out. So just on all the tips here, I'm going to add some holly. And I'm going to make them nice and big, and you'll see why in a little bit. So I've got some sanding sugar here. This is kind of the more coarser one, and the red is still wet. So I'm going to sprinkle some of this sanding sugar on. And I want it to stick, so that's why I'm doing it while it's wet. If you do it while it's dry, it will not stick. So just make sure that you're getting it right after you've piped them. Don't wait too long, because especially thicker icing dries faster. And then once you're happy with it, what I'm going to do is just go in with my scribe here, because it is thicker icing and it just dries really quickly. I'm going to make sure that those are nice and stuck in there, so I'm just going to push them in with my scribe. You could also dip this cookie in the sanding sugar if you wanted to, and just kind of gently do that. That would kind of squish them in without you having to do it. My brown icing wasn't fully dry when I went to go do the red parts, so I didn't want to dip it because I didn't want it stuck to the brown too much, so I didn't want to squish it out of place. So I've let it dry for a little bit because I don't want to go and ruin what I've piped. And now I'm just taking a soft brush and kind of sweeping away the rest of the sugar. My red is not fully dry, so I could kind of shake this off if I wanted to, but again, because my red's not dry, like fully, I don't want to, risk shaking it too hard and ruining those nice round holly, balls. So I'm going to go in with a soft brush here and just kind of gently go. And again, I'm going to go in with my green outline consistency. And I'm just going to add a little bit of greenery just to put some color and add some in the middle here. Now you can do this, or you can do more holly balls in the middle there if you like. It really depends what you're going for, but this is kind of an option. Ties in nicely to our first cookie with the green. And then just kind of adding random kind of branches and needles, I guess you can say, pine needles. Even though that's not what grows on holly, but we're just mixing it up here. Just more for color and texture and interest for the cookie, just to switch it up, make it easy for ourselves, so you're not making flood icing and all this. So when you're dealing with just one consistency outline, you have it already, and these are kind of easy cookies because you can do one step after another. You don't have to wait too long in between. And I just keep going until I'm happy with it. You can add a lot or just a little bit, it's really up to you. And I'm just using the same technique that I did with the first cookie, just doing little lines here, overlapping if I've made a few mistakes or it didn't come out right. And there we have it. We have our holly branch cookie. So next up we have our snowflake cookie. So this is the Anne Clark snowflake shape. And again, I'm going to put some flood icing on here. So here I don't actually have blue flood, so I'm going to use my outline consistency. So you can see I'm squeezing really hard and there's a small hole. So notice it's coming out all crazy and curly. So that's usually what happens when your hole is really small and you're putting a lot of pressure on the bag. And normally I would use my flood. It spreads a lot better than my outline, and you can see the outline is kind of just picking up on the brush almost. It's really thick, so it's not as easy to spread. You can also dampen your brush a little bit. That will help spread the icing. So I do dampen it kind of halfway through when I add a little bit. And when I started as well, my brush was a little bit damp. And this way it spreads easily, so you don't always have to use flood. I prefer using it. I didn't make a flood consistency in this one because I wasn't planning on flooding. And this was the only cookie that I was doing in this color, so I kind of kept it easy for myself. And I wanted a little bit of texture too. I'm not looking for it to be too even. If it does end up even, that's okay, but I'm not really picky. So we're going to just take our white outline consistency and as clean as we can go across the cookie from one side to the other. So for the last line, I'm going to focus and try to crisscross right on top of the other two. The trick is to focus on where you're starting and where you're ending. So that way you get as straight as a line as possible, and make sure you lift up your bag a little bit and it'll give you a nice straight line. And then here we're just doing a little bit of pressure piping to add some detail to the snowflake. So basically the piping bag is in one spot. I'm putting pressure with my hand, and then I'm dragging, as I'm letting go of the pressure, I'm dragging it towards the line. So you can practice this a little bit. So you're basically building up the icing on the end, and then as you let go of the pressure, you kind of drag the bag away from that kind of bulb you created with the icing. And once you get the hang of it, it goes kind of fast. When I'm piping with my right hand, and I've got my left finger against the bag. So this really helps to steady my hand. And I've got my elbows and my arms kind of against the table, so I have something steadying my hand, but I'm also using my finger there to hold the bag steady as well. It's almost like a two-handed piping. And it really helps a lot. Sometimes you can put it on your hand, like your finger against your hand, or the piping bag, whatever feels comfortable. And that really, really helps to give those fine details like in the right spot. Especially when you're putting pressure on a bag with outline consistency, it's thicker. So your hand tends to kind of shake, especially when you're putting that pressure on. So that really, really helps to steady that. So now that we've done all the edges, I'm going to go ahead and do the middle here. We're just going to add little V's here. So I'm just doing a line down and back up. And you can always turn the cookie if it feels more comfortable to do it another way. You know, turn it towards you if that's easier every time you do the lines. And then just add a couple dots, a little pressure here, touching down the cookie.